What I'm going to do today is I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and my kind of relationship with comics. And I'm going to talk about different ways that people have talked about what comics are and theorized about comics. So basically, comics are a sequence of images and words that tell a story. And I like using the term graphic narrative because, some people say, well, just say comics, because using terms like graphic narrative is just trying to dress up something and make it acceptable. But I like the term graphic narrative because it's really broad. So it encompasses fiction and nonfiction, short works, long works. And it emphasizes the importance of narrative, because often when we talk about comics, we focus on the drawing, but I actually think the writing is perhaps more important than the drawing, because you still have to be able to construct a narrative that pulls people in and leads them along. Will Eisner says that ideally the artist and the writer should be the same person, because then you're inside the same brain and it's easier. When people say they can't draw, what they usually mean is, I cannot sit down in front of something and reproduce it exactly realistically. Because I think that that's what we're taught a lot when we're younger, is that's what good drawing is. And I would actually say that good drawing is being able to create a drawing that expresses an emotion and that other people read and understand what you're trying to say and are moved by. The more abstract an image is, the less realistic and representational and specific, the more the reader can insert themselves into the work. So if I am looking at the picture on the far left, that's obviously not me. And I can't insert myself as much into the story. But if it's the picture on the other end, that could be anybody, right? And I think it's similar with prose. You've probably all read books where every single thing is described, like, then I got out the tea and I decided to make myself a cup of tea, and I took down my white china cup, and then I took out the Earl Grey tea that my relative got me 10 years ago in England. And there's so much detail that you can't imagine anything yourself. But the more that the writer forces you to imagine, the more you are participating in the story, and it becomes a back and forth movement between yourself and the writer. This is like Linda Berry from the 80s. So what I want to say basically is being able to draw is a good thing, and you can take lessons and develop certain skills and learn how to use the materials well. But really, equally or more important are the skills of a writer. And so I think those include being able to build a strong story that draws people in, and also the process that we all know about and we probably all really dislike, of going through and editing our own work and throwing things out that we're really attached to, and adding more things in because somebody else reads our story and they're like, well, I don't understand what's going on there. Why is that character doing that? And you're like, well, I have it all figured out in my head. And then you realize, oh yeah, like if I don't actually put it in the book, then other people don't understand it. So that was one of the things that happened to me when I was writing my book. Was I had written this book, I sold it, and then my editor said, we need more information about how your mom was before she got Alzheimer's, so that we can understand more about what the loss was like for you. And for me as the writer, I'm in my own head and I'm like, yeah, but I know about my mom. Oh, right, you're not psychic. So those are the kinds of skills that you need when you're drawing comics, just like you need when you're writing prose. And I think we get really hung up on whether we can draw or not, and I think that's the wrong question. So I'm going to get into now the topic that I'm supposed to talk about, which is the process of combining illustration and text without crowding either to the margin. And I want to say, so I'm going to talk about some ways that people have done this, and I think for those of you who are writers or artists of any kind, you know that there's things that you can learn how to do, and then sometimes you can't really explain why something works or why you did it a certain way. It's just, that's what works, right? And that's what ends up, conveying the emotion or the idea that you wanted to convey. So some of it I can't explain, but I'm going to explain you some stuff. Okay, so I'm going to show you a sequence from the Contract with God. And This is the first few pages of the book, so imagine it as the way that Will Eisner is drawing you into his story and making you commit to reading his story. And when in his own book, he uses a lot of examples of his own work to talk about the ways that words and images work together. And he talks about this as an example of the words having a supportive involvement in the imagery. So not just the mechanical function of telling the story, but they're actually part of the imagery. And Scott McCloud, who you may have gathered by this point, is very obsessed with comics, and also he's a little bit anal, like he classifies everything and organizes everything. So he has like these 7 types of ways that words and images can be combined. And I believe that he would call this the montage combination, so where the words and pictures are part of each other. So you have these gigantic words soaked with the rain, and this tiny figure at the bottom bent over. And on the next page, you can see how he's really, really exaggerated the rain, that it's just pouring off this man. And here, again, we have the drenched words, and this man just wading through this massive amount of water. You can see how simple and yet complicated what he's doing is. These words have become this huge presence in the work, and they're really overwhelming this man. So one thing about Linda Barry is her writing is always like this. It takes up at least half the panel. It's kind of an artwork in and of itself. She does it by hand, and she kind of varies between the block letters and the script. So we could just read this. I'm like covering up half the image on my laptop because you'll see it on the PowerPoint. But we could just take away the image, and you would still understand what she was talking about. So Scott McCloud would call this the amplification combination, because the images amplify what the text is telling us. So they do a few things. For one thing, you can see why she wouldn't want to tell her mom, because her mom is super scary. And she also moves ahead in time. So she tells you what happened on the phone call, and then in the image is her mom questioning her and demonstrating why she wouldn't have told her mom. One of the things that Will Eisner talks about is that one of the differences between film and comics, because they're both panels, right, with an image in each panel, but in films you're forced to watch the images in a certain order because you can only just see them as they come. Whereas in comics, you have this unspoken agreement between the writer and the reader, which I guess you have in prose as well, that the reader's not going to skip ahead. So Scott Thompson here is kind of forcing you to sit through this drive, which actually it didn't start on this page. So they go for a drive in the truck through the darkness and the silence, and then finally at the end she says, "Why did you say you love me, Craig?" This is an example for me where the art is actually working as text, because it's an image of the two of them in the car, but you're actually reading it, right? You're reading it as the silence and the tension between them. And so in this whole excerpt, there's very, very, very few words, but he uses them in a really precise, controlled, deliberate way. So he's obviously still alive and has to be shot again, and then the black panel is the end, and he's dead. Isn't that a great ending?